Well, thank you for everybody who has decided to join us on this very cloudy and overcast day in Terre Haute, Indiana. I hope it's sunny wherever you are. So welcome to Candle's Holocaust Museum and Education Center's Be the Change speaker series. My name is Leah Simpson, and I am the current education director at the museum. So I am very excited for this event. It's always wonderful to hear survivor stories, and I think that we will have some very interesting things that happen during our Q&A, but I won't let the surprise out of the bag quite yet. But remember to use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen in order to be able to ask some questions. I will moderate that Q&A session at the end. So like I said, please use that. And in the meantime, we have Cantor Michael Zusman here today. He received his cantorial ordination and Master of Sacred Music from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in 2007. He has worked as a pulpit cantor and as a Jewish prison chaplain in the United States and in Canada. Michael is the founder of L'chaim, Jews Against the Death Penalty, and sits on the advisory board of the Death Penalty Action. Given his involvement with federal death row inmates in Terre Haute, Michael has been invited to sit on the Interfaith Council of the Wabash Valley, where he serves as an exciting member and was one of the essayists in their publicized volume, From the Killing Fields of the Federal Government, Interfaith Essays on the Resumption of Executions. And this is how we came to learn about Michael, through a beloved friend of the museum. So we are so thankful that we were able to make that connection. So like I said, Michael is a third generation Holocaust survivor, and he is here to share their story. So I am going to let him jump in and share this story.
Thank you, Leah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you for joining us today on the overcast day. Leah said she hopes that it's sunny. Our daughter's name is Sunny, so it's always sunny where we are. And I'm just grateful that you would share this time with us. So without further ado, because there is a lot of ground I want to cover, I'm going to go right into this, and we'll start with sharing my screen here. So hopefully you can all see that. So I just wanted to start with a couple thank yous. I was writing this on a day that I realized was Kristallnacht 83 years later, so the synchronicities continue. But to Eva Moses Poor of blessed memory, whose ideas about forgiveness as healing have been very central to me as a prison chaplain and in the work that I do, and her passion for never forgetting and learning from the past sits with me. Of course, to Leah Simpson and Candles for this forum, to Terry Fear of blessed memory, who is the individual that was connector that Leah mentioned, to the fellow members of the Interfaith Council of the Wabash Valley, some of whom are here already. I see them. My high school friend, Courtney Ewan, who helped me find the family of the righteous Gentile, one of whom will be featured in this story. To Camille Capera, the research and documentation specialist at the Ulma Family Museum of Poles Saving Jews in World War II in Markowa, Poland, who was the individual who did the grunt work to actually find the family. To my maternal aunt, Naomi Holben, who has been searching for decades and archiving and even transcribed the interview that led to the paper that led to this process of that led us here today. And of course, to my beloved great aunt, Rose Belfer of blessed memory, and to my grandmother, Clara Grossman, who is with us today through Zoom as well. And to the Cegelski family, to Tomek Cegelski and family, and you'll see why their presence is so significant here today very soon. Just a disclaimer, the events that we're talking about here happened well before I was born, and in my lifetime, recollections have changed. So I'm bringing to you as best as I can what has been told to me, with the knowledge that, my Brandeis motto where I went always sits with me. Emet, truth even unto its innermost parts. We will still be searching and looking for the full truth, but this is as we have it now. And finally, a dedication, as has been mentioned. My passion is abolition of the death penalty, and the dedication goes to Elie Wiesel, who actually attended the synagogue where I served as a cantor before I was there in Bethel in New London, Connecticut. And in Connecticut was where he famously made his remark about the death penalty: "Death is not the answer." So originally, this was a term paper at Brandeis University in the year 2000, and that's where I'm going to be drawing a lot of my notes from as I talk to you today. But we're going to start with this image of the Spektor family. So this is an image that's survived wonderfully in our family from the late 1930s. And the Spektor family, that is my mother's mother and her family, are from the area called Volyn, which was the then northeastern district of Poland that is in present-day Ukraine. And throughout the war, they were able to survive, some of them, through the role of righteous Gentiles. And that is what this story is going to focus on today. For decades, the survivors of the family were reluctant to tell their story, understandably. It came out during Jewish holidays and during festive occasions where bits and pieces would come forward. Finally, on July 23rd, the year 2000, we decided to record their experience using an old karaoke machine in my Aunt Rose's home on Osage Road in West Hartford, Connecticut. And this is the result of their tale here. Okay. So I want to read a couple things from the beginning of this paper just to set the tone for what we're trying to do here. The harrowing story that you're about to hear is one of survival, not merely by sheer luck, fortitude, or intellect, though those factors surely played a part. The safety and lives of Clara, Rose, Ita, and Libby, who were the four sisters that we're going to focus on today, was left squarely in the hands of a select few people, a group of individuals known today as righteous Gentiles, in Hebrew Chasidei Umot Ha'olam, righteous members of the nations of the world. These heroic figures constituted a small portion of the general population, but some could be found in every country over which the Holocaust cast its shadow. The righteous Gentiles were from all walks of life, religions, cultures, socioeconomic strata of society. They were local, ordinary citizens who observed the Jewish tragedy unfolding and who brought life-threatening risks upon their families and themselves by sheltering, sustaining, and reuniting Jews forced into hiding. Some were motivated by a combination of humanitarian concerns, religious or spiritual beliefs, Jewish friendships, or family ties to rescuers, and others were compelled by less praiseworthy factors. The fate of the Spektor sisters and thousands of European Jews fleeing Nazi and European genocide during the Shoah, the Holocaust, was contingent upon the kindness of these rare beacons of light that shined most brightly during one of humanity's darkest hours. Their story illuminates another chapter in the saga of Holocaust memoirs, a voluminous collection that will likely never be long enough to record the lives of each of the millions of individuals lost in that conflagration, nor cover the scope of its impact on the millions more who survived and their descendants. So to give you the area where we're talking about and going to be homing in on, this is a broad view of the area of Volyn that was the home of the Spektor family. It's a current map. The borders have changed over the years, but that's the part of Europe that we're talking about. And this is a closer view of the area. So you can see some of the cities that are nearby, Warsaw, Lublin, Lvov. Okay. So just I'd like to set the stage a little bit for what the family was like before the war. They lived in a small Jewish farm settlement called Jabo Creek near the town of Kozin and the town of Radzwilov, all located in Poland at the time. They lived on a tiny farm, replete with its own storefront where they sold their produce. They were self-sufficient. They thatched their own roof, refitting it annually. As Rose said decades later, they lived a very happy life in a house that their father built with his own hands. Their household included their father Yitzchak, a farmer and owner of the small family store, their mother Pesya, and 8 children, 5 girls and 3 boys, with all but one of them at home by the start of the war. That daughter who lived away was Fega, who lived in a town called Operand with her husband Herschel Lober and their young boy Beirish. There was one other family member house as well, the maternal grandmother, Ella Ridiker, born in 1849. And Elka had a very close relationship with many of the members of the family. My grandmother remembered having come down with scarlet fever at the age of 4, and it was her grandmother, my grandmother's grandmother, who took her to the nearby city of Dubna to be treated with bynkus, the suction cup and flame bleeding technique often used for ailments at the time. Clara recalls grandmother was often her caregiver. She recalls carrying Elka's laundry to the wash in the nearby lake where they would do their laundry. When she brought back her grandmother's clean clothes, she would invariably offer her a blessing, hoping that Clara would live to be 100 years old and to see Hamashiach. Clara is here today. She is 100 years old. And this image here that you're looking at, I should say, is a current image that we found of the land that the house and the farm would have stood on at the time. So the family, at the outbreak of the war, had an offer to leave Europe from the father, Yitzchak's brother. I'm sorry, the father Yitzchak's father. So this gentleman, who is my grandmother Clara's father's father. So his name is Yisrael or Israel Spektor. And he was already living in the United States and in Philadelphia. However, in deference to the wishes of my grandmother's maternal grandmother, Elka Ridiker, who wanted to stay in her home, the home that she knew for the final years of her life, the family decided to stay, not knowing at the time what the future would hold. I'm reminded a little bit of the story that Viktor Frankl tells of why he stayed to care for his parents when he had an offer to leave Vienna before the war. So, other tidbits about the family before the war. The mother, Pesya, often cooked, and leftover perishables were stored in an underground bunker and preserved with salt. Yitzchak, the patriarch, worked on the farm, at the market, and in the store. All the girls chipped in, cleaned and washed and helped with the family store, and the eldest boy, Shmuel, cared for the horse and farm animals. Clara, like many of her siblings, went to a non-Jewish school through the 6th grade. Courses were taught in Polish, with Ukrainian as well. And Clara would walk to school with some of her classmates, take a shortcut through a frozen lake in the winters, and afraid she would fall through the thin ice, but never doing so. And I see that as quite symbolic of the thin ice that my grandmother has walked all her life, never falling through. Clara and her classmates wore school uniforms that included knee socks, And 85 years later, Clara still remembered how cold her knees were in the winters. Clara was able to venture off to go to her favorite city of Dubna, roughly 30 miles away, to work for room and board in a cafeteria. Things were far from easy for the Spektors financially, but they again never knew from anything else. They observed all the Jewish holidays, including the weekly Shabbat, during which Yitzchak was careful not to smoke until after making Havdalah, the Saturday night ceremony ending Shabbat. Pesya wore a shaitel, the wig that a married woman traditionally wears, and prepared festive meals. Yitzchak and presumably the two boys, Shmuel and David, the older boys, attended services on Shabbat and holidays at a neighbor's house where the Jewish men congregated for prayer. The paternal grandfather Yitzchak would send $10 every Passover, which would be enough to purchase an entire animal that would last the family throughout the Passover holiday. Anti-Semitism was indeed a regular fact of life for the Spektors. Clara recalls something quite poignant. It happens that Clara is born on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1920. It also happens that every Christmas Eve, on the way back from the midnight mass, there was a teenage boy who had taken to throwing rocks at the windows of the home. Yitzchak, Clara's father, came to expect the behavior, but he did not like it. And 1 year after the boy threw the rocks, Yitzchak chased him down and, quote-unquote, beat him up. The scepter of anti-Semitism remained for Yitzchak's family. It was in this environment that in 1939, before the start of the war, Elka Ridiker, the maternal grandmother, passed away at the age of 90. Her passing was really symbolic of the end of an era for the family and for the Jewish people. So I'd like to talk now about what happened next, which is the Soviet occupation in 1939. As many of us know, Germany attacked Poland on September 1st, 1939. And at that time, they were allied with Russia in the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. And the area where my grandmother and the Spektors lived, Volyn and Jabokrik, fell under the Russian occupation. It certainly was a blessing considering the more immediate threat German rule posed for the Jews. But the perception from Rose and her family was that it was, quote-unquote, not much better. The Spektors were allowed to remain in their home during the 2 years of Russian rule. Young Clara, at 19, was even able to apply for and obtain work in Russian governmental offices 5 miles away in the town of Kozin, where she was assigned to registering young men who were mostly Jewish and who were eligible for the military draft. Later, she sold buttons from her suitcase in the Kozin market. The tolerant attitude and neutral treatment of the Spektors and local Jews lasted throughout the 2 years of Soviet occupation of Poland until 1941. At that time, with Operation Barbarossa, the Germans invaded Russia, and very quickly the Soviet forces retreated the area where the Spektors lived. Clara recalled how in their region the Russians left a full day before the Nazis arrived. And they stormed in, the Nazis stormed in with tanks and ammunition, and as Clara recalled, everybody was frightened, scared to death. It was very loud. There was a forced migration that the Spektors joined from all the Jews in the area to the nearby Kozin ghetto. They had to leave behind their home, their horse, their cow, and other animals, as well as everything they owned, other than what they could fit on the carriage that they carried to their new communal home. And they went to the Kozin ghetto, which is located on this map to give you an idea of where it's located. It's where the red mark is, southwest of Dubna, the city of Dubna. The Spektors lived for several months within the guarded ghetto without further violence, though amid horrid conditions and forced labor. The Nazis came with trucks daily to the Jewish residences, and they took pre-selected individuals and drove them to work in a field near a lake where the grass was particularly soggy. Occasionally, some of the Spektor children, including Clara, were asked to join them as they would dig into the heavy turf 6 hours a day. Meanwhile, the Germans put white bands with the Star of David on the arms of all the Jews in order to identify them. Clara said, "These were very inconvenient circumstances. We didn't have enough food or water, and there were a few families together in one apartment. In order to get food, the family would go to a local population that felt bad for the Jews of the ghetto, and some of whom tended to provide some food items as a courtesy." In what would become known later as one of the first stages of the final solution to the quote-unquote Jewish question, the Nazis began to liquidate the ghettos, such as those at Kozin, in a series of pogroms, mass executions starting in 1942. Hired mercenaries from local populations joined specialized units of the SS called Einsatzgruppen to carry out the genocide, along with Ukrainian civilian volunteers and officials. They came to the Kozin ghetto in two waves, the first which occurred on May 25th, 1942. The Judenrat, which was the board of Jewish overseers of the ghetto, found out ahead of time, back day, that the Germans were going to come to destroy the ghetto and warned the families. People got terrified and panicky, said Clara. We looked for a way out. The family decided to leave the ghetto, but not until the night before the expected liquidation on May 24th, 1942, because there was no other place for them to stay with any semblance of food or shelter for a long period before that date. By the day of the assault, Yitzchak, the father, and David, the middle-aged, inside the ghetto. It's unknown where Shmuel was on that day, but he likely was not in the ghetto and hiding in a stable, where he often worked. The four daughters, now recall the eldest daughter, Fega, was not with the family at the start of the war. They didn't know what happened to Fega when the war started. She was in Oberand, a different city. So there were four sisters in the household at this time: Ita, Clara, Rose, and Libby. They approached their mother, Pesia, and asked her to take their youngest brother, Moishe, you can see her holding him in this picture, and join them in running into the fields to hide overnight. Pesia felt that she would not be able to take baby Moishe at the time, who was understandably already sobbing in terror over what was happening. She did not want to jeopardize the hiding place of the rest of her family with little Moishe's crying, and could not make herself to abandon him. The daughters said they would stay with their mother in that case, and that they always would remain by her side. Pesia insisted they leave, however, while she stayed behind, hiding in a closet with young Moishe. "I'll come later," she said to the girls before they left. This final act of courage and selflessness, by demanding that her daughters leave her side, without question saved their lives. The Ukrainian police found Pesia and young Moishe in the closet. As she had foreseen, her young sons crying had given them away. The police took both out to the mass graves that had already been dug by other Jews forcibly assigned the task. There the Nazi soldiers shot them to death. With some of the victims of this assault still alive with bullet wounds, the Nazis ordered that the graves be covered, burying alive many of the Jews. Like the countless others taken out and killed at that time, Pesia or Moishe do not have individual graves. The massacre is marked by a monument behind the town of Kozin, erected over the final resting of the hundreds of Jews murdered. The day after the killing, the daughters came back, and this is the marker. The day after the killing, the daughters came back to the home to see if their family had survived. Their father, Yitzchak, was on the stoop when they asked him where they could find their mother and youngest brother. Yitzchak told them the tragic news. When I heard it, remembered in tears 70 years later, I fainted. The Spektor family had nowhere to go at this time, but they again felt compelled to take their chances in the same ghetto. Because of that fact, the Judenrat knew that there were more death waves coming, a second death wave. On the night prior to the anticipated second assault, the sisters Ita, Clara, Rose, and Libby once again decided to flee together. They hoped they would go to the woods overnight and come back as they did in the wake of the first wave. When they heard that the attackers intended to destroy everyone and everything this time, they realized they had to go elsewhere. They were going to have to die, Rose explained, so why not run? And thus began their flight into the hands of the righteous Gentiles. These are the four sisters here. From clockwise, from top left, from eldest to youngest, top left is Ita, top right is my grandmother Clara, bottom left is my great aunt Rose, the only other Spektor family member who I knew personally, and the bottom right is the youngest of the four, Libby. The Poles, as we know, were also victimized quite a bit during World War II for various reasons. They were vilified and victimized, and many Jews sought to find rescue in their arms. The Spektors looked to take advantage particularly of the connections that they had with Poles through their father, Yitzchak. Her father, Rose put it, had lent many Polish individuals large sums of zlota, and they had good connections. While some of their father's former customers refused to associate with the Spektors, many did agree to help these four girls and gave them bread. In one case, the four sisters were allowed to sleep on top of a potato cellar, although they were told they could not stay long. And this brings us to a highlight of their story. And I'm going to focus on by reading this section of the paper word for word from as it was told me years ago, and recognizing that, as I said in the beginning, we're still are open to finding out the full truth. This is the story that my family recalled. The first individual that the four sisters successfully approached was also the one who sacrificed the most to save their lives. He was an older Polish Catholic farmer who they knew only as Mr. Cegelski. We only discovered decades later, last year in fact, that his full name was Michal Cegelski, born September 8th, 1880, and that he was well known in his town, having even served as mayor of Zagazga, and my apologies for my mispronunciations here. Initially, Mr. Cegelski hid all four girls in a stack of straw for some time outside of his farm. Rose described a powerful example of Mr. Cegelski's willingness to put the lives of the four sisters before his own by hiding them despite the presence of nearby Ukrainian police, who would have put him to death if they discovered them. As Rose told the story, one day a group of these soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers, came not to look for Jews, but rather to rob Mr. Cegelski of whatever items they could carry off, demanding in particular animal hides that he. Though Mr. Cegelski said he had none, the soldiers did not believe him and searched anyhow. With their bayonets, began poking in the mounds of straw where the girls were sitting in order to look for the hides. The sisters were, quote, shaking like leaves, and Rose was twitching so much under the hay that Libby had to throw herself on top of her to prevent her from giving them away. Seeing how the soldiers were extremely close to discovering the girls, Mr. Cegelski quickly directed the attention of the Ukrainians to the attic, where he indeed had hidden the hides, and he gave them to the soldiers. By doing this, he likely saved the lives of all four Spektor sisters. When it got colder, as fall turned to winter, the sisters knew the straw wouldn't stay there forever. Mr. Cegelski permitted the Spektors to dig underground what Clara described as a grave or a bunker, roughly the size of a standard dining room table, in which the four young women remained all day, every day, for roughly 11 months during the winter of 1942 to 1943. The girls dug the bunker and placed sticks, roots, and straw to disguise their hiding place. To sit there, recalled Clara, was no pleasure. You could only sit, you couldn't stand up. Bathroom, and each had to wait until it was dark to relieve herself. It was a shelter nonetheless, and more than the sisters could have asked for at the time. Crucially, Mr. Cegelski provided each of them with a potato and a bottle of water every day. My grandmother has loved potatoes ever since. As winter persisted, the snow came down so heavily at times that it served effectively to wipe away any tracks the girls might have left from the bunker to Mr. Cegelski's home. On those occasions, the farmer, Mr. Cegelski, risked being seen making trips out to the bunker in order to give each of them soup containing flour and water, because he didn't have more food items on his own. This was the way he used to live. He would even call upon Libby at times to help him prepare food in the kitchen. If the girls were particularly hungry during the night, at times they'd also go venture out on their own to the nearby pigsty in the hope of finding a leftover potato peel. Clara recalled seeing pictures of various saints on the walls of Mr. Cegelski's home, attesting perhaps to his level of religious Catholic observance. On quiet nights during which no dogs were around to bark, the sisters were allowed to sleep in his one-room house, as they recalled it. On one such occasion, Rose witnessed him laying down on his bed and praying, quote, "Dear God, I pray to you that you save the four souls that I am hiding." Rose's voice cracked, and she remembered at this recollection the kindness, piety, and sincerity of her sister's Savior. In the end, Mr. Cegelski paid the ultimate price for his kindness to the four Spektor teenagers, including my grandmother. After the German soldiers had left from searching his home, Ukrainians came and said they wanted to take all he had left. The older Polish farmer, who would have been around 65 at the time, gave the soldiers what they wanted, but they still were unsatisfied, demanding to know if he were harboring any Jews. Mr. Cegelski denied the accusation, but the Ukrainians refused to believe him. Instead, as my family remembers, they took him in the backyard and they put a knife in his chest. They then released all the animals from the stable. Mr. Michal Cegelski's martyrdom will always epitomize for the Spektor family and we, their descendants, the role that righteous Gentiles like he played in keeping Jews alive. We are blessed now, these decades later, to have learned the full identity of this great man and to be connected with his family. The survivors of the Spektor family and their descendants have officially applied for his formal recognition in the Garden of the Righteous Among the Nations at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum and Memorial in Israel, and we eagerly await their reply. All in our family owe our lives to his sacrifice, without which I would not be reciting these words to you today. Now, we've learned that the makeup of Mr. Cegelski's family may be different than the way my family remembered it. So again, I'm just going to read to you what was said to me those years ago, and there may be differences in family members, but this is the story at this point that my family recalls. Mr. Cegelski's children continued their father's legacy in a way that made them children of rescuers. Rather than retaliating against or blaming the girls, Cegelski's older son, Yannick, who lived next door, upon hearing of his father's death, came by and said he and his spouse were leaving the next day. His wife, upon seeing the sisters in a dangerous area that they originally deemed safe, his wife warned them, saying, "Run, they are going to kill you." Mr. Cegelski's other son at the time took an even more active role in the sisters' safety. Not only did this son occasionally talk with them, but he also shared with them information about their family, their father and brother, and we'll get to that in a moment. The ever-growing connection between Mr. Cegelski's children and the Spektor sisters, for whom their father gave up his life, became clear in the final words of this other son to the Spektor sisters. Realizing what the Ukrainians had done, this son said, quote, "Girls, they just killed our father. Now I don't know what we're going to do." For this son, it was as if the Spektor sisters had become his sisters. More to come at the end of this presentation on Mr. Cegelski of blessed memory. This picture here, as you see from the caption, is on the right, on the far right, Mr. Cegelski, born September 8th, 1880. When I learned that his first name is the Polish equivalent of my own, Michael, you can imagine how I felt. I don't have a clock here, unfortunately, so I'm hoping we're okay with time. I'm just going to keep chugging on, but you can let me know if I need to speed things up. I mentioned before a moment ago what happened to his father, Yitzchak, and their brother, David. The truth is, most families were not nearly as humane towards Jews as the Cegelskis were. This was the case for these two individuals. Yitzchak was 48 at the time, and David would have been around 12 years old. The sisters knew that when they left the ghetto that night, they knew that their father and brother were on their way to a Czechoslovakian community in the Polish town of Stanislavy, another Ukrainian man whom their father supported very much. The man agreed to keep Yitzchak and David for a very short period. And this proved a counterexample that it wasn't just Poles who did reach out. There were individuals of every persuasion, including the Ukrainian, who did, like this person, give shelter. It happened that this was happening while the four girls were on Mr. Cegelski's farm, and they discovered that Yitzchak and David were very close by, close enough that they could visit. Rose and Ita ultimately elected to take upon themselves the risk, while Clara and Libby stayed behind in the bunker. So Rose and Ita hugged and cried when they met their father Yitzchak. By Rose's recollection, he looked quite sickly, telling Rose, "I don't know if I'm ever going to see you again." Young David's comments were similarly pleading and scared. "I don't know if I'm even going to make it," he said. "My feet hurt, I can't walk anymore, and my shoes are torn." And at the end, they said goodbye. From there, father and son went to another Ukrainian nearby that Yitzchak had been supporting a lot, but where, as Rose recalled, he did not last long enough. As soon as Yitzchak and David arrived there on December 18th, 1942, this Ukrainian son, who was a Ukrainian policeman, saw them and shot and killed them. The Cegelski farm was situated close enough that the four girls could hear a gunshot from the area in which they knew their father and brother were attempting to hide. They assumed the worst, and their fears were confirmed. One of the Cegelski's sons came to their bunker to inform them that their father, Yitzchak, had been murdered. Since no mention was made of David at the time, and since there was only one gunshot, there over the years as to where David survived that day, perhaps managed to escape. We continue to search databases. We have not found any evidence yet, and our family does observe his Yortzeit, his annual memorial, on the same day observe Yitzchak's on the Jewish calendar. The eldest brother, Shmuel, then around 24, this picture is from prior to the war. had fled on his own from the Kozin ghetto. But tragically, he had even less of a chance than his father and brother. He was a long-time stable worker tending to horses, and he found shelter in various open stables on nearby farms. While he was hiding in one of these, a group of Ukrainians, quote, hunted him down in one street in a place called Bashaba. As Rose solemnly retold, it was there that they killed him like a dog in the street. As with Pesya, Moshe, Yitzchak, and possibly David, Shmuel has no grave. The date of Shmuel's murder still remains unknown. The four sisters still didn't know the fate of Shmuel either. After fleeing Mr. Cegelski's farm, they were lost. They knew now about their father and possibly about David. They decided to do the only sensible thing that came to mind and change their location by continually running in search of refuge. They ran and ran, covering 30 miles. Clara recalled sleeping in a field, waking up in a puddle of rainwater and having to sit down in the grass to dry off. She was so exhausted that the rain did not awaken her. They resigned themselves to the fact that if somebody spotted them, they were going to kill them. They decided to pose as Polish daughters of the late Mr. Cegelski. They went to Dubna, a city, and asked for help in a Polish church. But their plan was thwarted when someone in the church indicated that Mr. Cegelski did not have daughters, exposing their disguise. The girls once again were forced to run. They came to a town called Maragosht, a Czechoslovakian colony in Poland and a suburb of Dubna, and they decided once again to pose as Poles on the run. They knocked on the door of a Pole by the name of Mr. who had no prior relationship with their father. It's uncertain whether or not he saw through their Polish Catholic identity claims, but he kept them overnight. He gave the girls his own bed to sleep on that night. Before leaving them for the night, he motioned to the saints, again, like Mr. Cegelski, pictured on the wall of his bedroom, and mentioned that they should pray to them before sleeping. To remain incognito, the Spektors promised Mr. Kettner they would later do as he suggested, though they knew they would not. Feeling dirty and full of lice, the Spektor sisters ultimately were unable to take advantage of the clean bed and instead saw fit to sleep on the floor beside it that night. The following day, after breakfast, Mr. Kettner sent them to a man that he thought could provide them with false IDs. Upon arriving, this person said he couldn't do that, but he still felt very sorry for them and allowed them to sleep in clean beds, giving them much to eat and drink. They went back to Mr. Kettner, but unfortunately, this good fortune of late was short-lived. When they heard him, he informed them of the impending arrival of farm workers. He indicated that if these new workers spotted the girls, they would kill him, the whole family, and the sisters, no question about it. The Spektors had no choice but to leave. They felt they had nowhere left to run, nor the strength to continue trying. They decided to rest in the safest place they could find in a nearby cemetery close to Dubna. They no longer could take the risk of running together, they realized. They decided to continue running in separate directions from then on, using their non-Jewish aliases in order to have a better chance of finding jobs on Czech farms in different areas. They made a pact to meet at the end of the war, a cemetery pact, if they survived, in the nearby city of Rovna, about 15 miles away. As they took stock of their plight, drained in an extended shock, one of the sisters, and the story has changed over the years as to which one, but at the end of the day, it could have been any, admitted to the others that she could no longer bear the weight of all that she experienced. She was going to give herself up. The other sisters rallied, and they said, "If you go, we all go with you." And thereafter, each sister swore to follow in the footsteps of any sibling who would decide to turn themselves in to the police. The second part of the cemetery pact. At this point, Rose decided to consult a set of cards that she had with her at the cemetery, and she had a tendency of doing, and she had done before in her life. When she read the cards, she was foretold in the cards that one of the sisters would not survive, and that the one who would fall would be blonde. The only two blonde sisters were Libby and Fega. Fega is the eldest sister who was living in Oparan, away from these four. So the sisters feared the worst for Fega. Libby was with them at the time. A word about Fega. Again, the sisters didn't know what happened to Fega until after the war, but this is what was happening to her at the time. Fega Lober, her husband Herschel Lober, and 9-year-old Bayrish were in Oparan, like I said, and they lost contact at the start of the war. Herschel worked on railroads. Fega attended to their child Bayrish, but decided to look for a job herself one day and left her son with a Ukrainian woman she knew and trusted, with the instructions to watch over him for a couple of days. When she returned, she found that the woman took the boy and brought him to the Jewish ghetto for unknown reasons. In Clara's version of these events, she recalled Fega saying that the Ukrainian woman gave Bayrish directly to the Nazis. Clara remembered being told that the woman who was the friend who gave up Bayrish did not want to keep the child simply because she did not think that any Jews had survived. Regardless, wherever Bayrish was, he was able to escape from the holding facility and to reach his father Herschel on the railroad. According to witnesses at the scene who later told Rose, Herschel embraced Bayrish at that time, saying that he would try his best to save his boy. Tragically, this was not to be. Both Herschel and Bayrish were murdered in a Nazi raid on the railroad. Only one worker was spared and lived to tell Fega of Herschel and Bayrish's death. For the rest of the war, Fega found work on her own on various farms and fields in Poland and Czechoslovakia, posing as a Pole. Her younger sister, Ita, who was the eldest of the four sisters who were on the run together, did the same throughout Volyn. Both Fega and Ita were able to successfully survive the war in this manner. Neither openly discussed their experiences with me comprehensively before passing, each in their 50s, many years later. Their memoirs were unable to be recorded in time to learn the details of how they managed to survive. This was the case with Clara, Rose, and Libby, and we turn to their individual stories now. This is Clara. Clara agreed to separate from after the cemetery and found her in the home of a Czech farmer and a Polish woman who was his wife. Clara hid her Jewish identity, explaining in Polish to the household matriarch that she was a Pole named Anna. Like many of her siblings, Clara was multilingual, functional in Yiddish, Polish, Russian, and Ukrainian, in addition to Hebrew reading skills. The name Anna appeared on a fraudulent card that Clara was able to find. The story that she told them was that she ran away from Odessa because they were going to be mobilized for the army, and so now she was looking for work. Here she was made to do very hard work, including feeding cows, horses, gardening, washing bandages for her landlords, and toiling in the fields. But they gave her food and shelter. The woman of the household included her in her family's custom of eating slices of homemade bread baked with goose fat as a mid-afternoon snack. But Clara had to deal with maltreatment at the hands of the husband, who was taken to running after her with a whip when she could not do certain arduous tasks, such as keeping up with the horses in the field. Fortunately, he never struck her. I would run to his wife, she explained, where she found safety during these outbursts. On one occasion, Anna, or Clara, and the Polish wife had an intense and intriguing exchange, beginning with a very implicating accusation. Clara remembered the Polish woman saying, "You know, you must be Jewish, because you look like Jesus' mother. Jesus' mother was Jewish. Aren't you Jewish?" I said, "No, I'm Polish." The woman added, "You should go to the church because we are Christian." Clara joined them one day, but when they arrived at the building, she remained outside for an hour or two while they went inside to pray. She also began walking back to their home early, well ahead of the crowds, to avoid suspicion. As she did so, a young non-Jewish boy of the same age followed her home and asked Clara if he could come in. "I'm sorry," she responded. "My parents are sleeping," thus averting possible trouble and exposure of her identity. This couple was intent on keeping Clara, or Anna, but they heard that Ukrainians would be coming back to look for Poles one evening, and they told Clara that they would have to sleep in the fields that night and come back to the house in the morning. When they did this, they discovered upon returning that the Ukrainians had indeed come by their home, and by leaving the house, they had most assuredly saved Clara's life. But Clara was increasingly concerned about the husband's violent tendencies, and she made the difficult decision to leave. She encountered similar ambiguity from other people she hid with as to whether or not they knew she was Jewish. The second family that came to her aid was of Czech origin. They accepted her identity and asked her to take care of their two young children, including bathing and feeding them. When they were working in the fields one day, Clara witnessed that the husband began beating his wife when she was putting something in the wrong place. Once again, fearing violence against her own person, Clara elected to leave after only a few weeks. The third family that Clara went to was also Czech, and she worked there as Anna as well. Their home was near a major highway. It happened one day someone knocked on the window looking for Jews, and the woman who owned the home told Clara to go upstairs and hide in the attic in a bunch of poltava, or straw, that Clara described as sticky like needles. Under the Anna alias, Clara elected to remain in this household indefinitely. Unlike her two previous hideouts, here she perceived no threat of violence from her rescuers. After some time, a Russian soldier came by, and asked if there were any German soldiers inside. The family members said and let him inside, fed him, and gave him quarter for the night. In the morning, he was without incident, and they inferred from this that the Nazis were offensive and pulling back, and that the Russians were doing well. Only when my grandmother saw Nazi soldiers retreating in a panic on the highway from her viewpoint at the house did she allow herself to believe the end of the war was near. She decided to stay another 2 weeks just to make sure. When she felt it was safe, Clara walked to the rendezvous city that was a few miles away. After more than a year without any contact of any sisters, she did not know if they were alive. When she reached Rovna, that was the city that they made the pact to meet in, she asked where the Jewish people were located and was sent to a place where Jewish men were praying. She waited outside until the religious service was over before asking one of them his city of origin. She learned that he was from the same town where Fega and Herschel lived before war, Operand, and asked him if he knew the name Lober. He indicated that the woman, Fega, of this family had survived and was working at the local hospital in Rovna. Clara was very excited and immediately walked to the hospital, but was not allowed in. She went back to the place where praying men congregated, assuming Fega would return there, since Jewish people didn't have anywhere else to go. Surely enough, when the workday ended, Fega came in through the door. "Fega," cried Clara, "where have you been?" Ironically, Fega was the only sister who did not make the cemetery pact to meet in Rovna, but had been brought there by the tide of work. Recalling the memory of her initial reunion with Fega in the refugee building in the evening, Clara described how she, quote, "was very happy to see her, and we were asking each other," and after nearly 70 years, her voice broke and she recalled the meeting, and the tears flowed from the powerful memory. But the question remained for Clara and Fega. What about Rose and Libby? After the cemetery pact, Rose woke up early to find another residence where she could stay using the Ukrainian language she spoke well and a matrika, or false birth document, that she owned that identified her as Helen, a non-Jewish Pole. The first place she got to was a Ukrainian mayor with Russian people working for him, cutting potatoes. His wife said to her, "I don't think you can stay here because you look Jewish." Rose left and walked, she said, until she reached a woman pulling weeds from a garden who allowed her to help her with the task. She said that she was running away from the prospect of being mobilized. Rose said this, from the prospect of being mobilized along with other young Polish girls to work in Germany. She shrewdly added that she would rather work with the Ukrainian population. The ploy succeeded, and the woman agreed. Rose remained steadily at this same house. She cleaned, she cooked, farmed, and worked for the family, and eventually became a fixture. When accompanying them to church, like Clara had done, she recalls how she, quote, had to walk by Jesus' statue, kiss his feet, and cross herself and splash holy water on her head, which she found to be very ticklish. And it was hard to hold back laughter from feeling tickled. But she didn't want to do it because she didn't want to give herself away, and she maintained her composure. Once, one local resident, supposedly a friend of hers, reported her to the Ukrainian police. They removed Rose, or Helen, from her home one midnight and took her fake ID to a Catholic priest who had been captured by the Ukrainians and who was being used to determine whether these documents were real. Whether the priest turned a blind eye to what he recognized as a forgery to spare her life, or whether he genuinely was convinced that the identification was real, we don't know. But he elected to approve the documents, and Rose was released. Many Ukrainians in the village have seen many of these kinds of midnight calls that Rose was taken in, and they knew that when they take you out, you don't come back. So when her rescuers saw that Rose was alive, they hugged and kissed and cried like babies. Still, Rose was the subject of further scrutiny. Other locals began trying to check and dig to see what I was breathing with, she said. The second test came when a suspicious neighbor asked her to retrieve weapons the Germans had left at the railroad tracks and to bring them back in a blanket for the Ukrainians to use. If she did this, they would know she's willing to die for Ukraine. Realizing this might be a setup, Rose only agreed to carry this out if she was accompanied by a Gentile friend named Nalia, who could report back to the other neighbors what she saw. This was brilliant. As she expected would occur, the two girls discovered that no ammunition was available for the taking at the railroads. Rose knew the Germans didn't leave anything behind, and that the scheme was most likely a way to accuse her of being a Quisling. Fortunately, with Nalia as a witness, she remained safe. What solidified her with her neighbors was after she successfully used her Yiddish to feign German and convinced a German general stationed in their area to order his soldiers not to steal hay from their farms. The entire community was very thankful, saying that she helped save them from economic ruin. She no longer had to worry about harassment from the neighbors. There was one relative of one of her next-door neighbors who ended up being another savior. This woman tricked Rose into coming into her home by telling her she had red dye for Rose's white dress. When Rose arrived, the individual revealed the real reason she had asked her to visit. Moving into a corner, she said to Rose, "Look, I've got something here and it's you. And if it concerns you, you don't have to worry. We can do something about it. And if it doesn't, then just forget about it." The woman removed from her pocket a very small piece of paper folded in four. It was a note. Rose immediately recognized her sister Fega's handwriting on the note, and once again found herself shaking like a leaf. Overwhelmed with emotion, trying to tell the woman she wasn't sure if she knew anything about the note's author, she eventually was able to hold back her tears. No longer, and she wept and wept. The woman comforted her and responded by saying, "Don't cry. Don't cry, sha sha sha. If it was your sister, I met her and she asked me to look around for anybody who looked similar." The woman realized that her family member's neighbor, Rose, was such a match. In about a month, the same individual arranged for funds to be able for Rose to travel to Rovna and reunite with her sister Fega, who was awaiting her. She also said she would provide Rose with whiskey to buy rides from Russian soldiers, food for the journey, and a dress. Rose immediately accepted the gracious offer. The family for whom Rose had worked found it very difficult to see her leave. They had even named their newborn daughter Halia, Ukrainian for Helen, after Rose's alias of Helen. Still, they understood it was time for her to move on and did not prevent her from doing so. When Rose finally reached the refugees building in Rovna, she caught sight of Fega, straining with a heavy load. Sneaking up behind her, Rose said that, quote, "If your husband would awaken from his grave and see you suffering, he would turn around." Fega, not recognizing her after being apart for so many years, said dryly that she did not need any pity. Rose responded, "Fega, on your sister, Razel." Fega dropped her bags and kissed and kissed. And like her sister Clara, when Rose told this story, her voice broke and her eyes watered at the thought of the blessed moment of reunion. The reasons for joy multiplied when she realized that Clara also survived, and that 2 months later, Ita, too, would join them in Rovna. And the three sisters there were together. The four sisters there were together. There was only one remaining sister now, who they did not know about, and that was their youngest sister, Libby, the family's blonde baby girl, who would have been about 14 years of age. Rose related the story of Libby's fate to Clara and Fega, and eventually to Ita when they reunited in Rovna. Rose was the first to learn about what happened to Libby. When Libby separated after the Pact in the cemetery with her sister, she landed in what seemed to have been the ideal situation, in a Czechoslovakian community near the Polish town of Olbarov. The woman she stayed with, Rose explained, loved her very much. When the same woman happened to catch a glimpse of Rose randomly at one point, she recognized that she looked like her ward and confirmed with Libby that the two were sisters. The woman arranged for a meeting between the sisters within weeks, and each sister was overjoyed to see the other alive. Though they planned for a second meeting 2 Sundays later, it never came to pass. Staying with the same woman was a Jewish man in his 40s who was also on the run. He secretly also served as a partisan fighting with the Ukrainians. Once, when Libby was sitting and working, this Jewish man approached her and said to her to come live with him. She said no, at which point he kissed her anyhow, and she slapped him. Enraged, the man told his fellow Ukrainians that a Jewish girl is in there. No sooner was it that they took her into the woods on September 6, 1943, and shot her, likely killing her. As soon as the woman who sheltered Libby discovered her fate, she took and crying with tears like a flood coming from her eyes. As she later told Rose, Libby was such a beautiful child. I loved her so much, like my own daughter. She was so talented, she could do anything. Rose's one meeting with her sister that final Sunday was, as she put it, the end. I've never seen Libby again. I don't know where her bones are. The tears that fell from Rose's eyes seemed much heavier this time in our recording setting. Her prediction at the cemetery had been correct. Their blonde sister Libby was the one to fall. Because we don't have many details exactly beyond these recollections of what happened, of course our family has been searching for any word that perhaps Libby may have survived. But again, we do not have any information, and so we observe the Yortzeit on that day, September 6, 1943. These are the four sisters who survived. Note that it's not the four who ran together, one of which was Libby, but three of them, Ita, Clara, and Rose, and their eldest sister Fega. The sisters decided to take a train from Rovna to a DP camp in Bindermichel, Austria. It took many days, stopping in several countries, and they remained in Bindermichel for a few years. Fega first left the U.S. with her husband, Shlomi Katz, whom she married in 6 short weeks. Rose was the next to go to America, and soon after with her new spouse, Fred Belfer, while Ita and her husband, Abraham Blitzstein, traveled to Buenos Aires, Argentina. In Clara's case, she met and married her husband, Manny Grossman, in the DP camp in Bindermichel, and that's where my aunt, Naomi Hoban, was born. Thanks to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Clara, then pregnant with her second child, Manny, and infant Naomi, joined thousands of other refugees and survivors on a ship that sailed across the Atlantic Ocean called General Bundy, that embarked from Bremen, Germany on November 8, 1948, taking 11 days to reach Boston Harbor. It was not an easy journey, particularly for someone who was pregnant at the time. For the Grossmans, so this is, we'll start with this slide here, and we'll go back to Aunt Rose. For the Grossmans, they were able to turn to Manny's brother, her husband Manny's brother Hyman, who resided in New York City. The Bronx was their new home and witnessed the birth of Pauline and 2 years later of Clara's third daughter, Irene Grossman, my mother. The family eventually relocated to Hartford, Connecticut, where Rose and her family had already moved and settled there for the next few decades. In 2003, Clara moved to West Palm Beach, Florida, where she lives not far from her daughter Naomi and in the same state as Pauline. Tragedy struck again with the untimely passing of my mother Irene in 1948. Yet Clara has lived to see the birth of a grandson, me, and my marriage to Molly Winston, and has witnessed the arrival of her great-granddaughters Sunny, Hebrew name Edith, my mother's Hebrew name, and Libby, named after Clara's sister Libby, who died so young. On December 24th, 2020, Clara fulfilled the wishes of her grandmother that she should reach her 100th year of life. She now offers the same wishes to her great-granddaughters every day when they speak over the phone. Rose had 3 married daughters in Cynthia, Wendy, and Elka, 4 wonderful grandchildren in Eli, Shayna, Shoshana, and Nina, and a great-granddaughter, Winifred, or Winnie. Rose passed away peacefully on July 22, 2020, at the age of 98. On her deathbed, she learned that we, my wife and I, would be giving our daughter, who is set to arrive soon, the name Libby, whose name she had been calling out in her final weeks. Rose's funeral occurred 2 days later on July 24th in Hartford, Connecticut, beside her beloved Fred. Given that this occurred during COVID, many family members participated via Zoom. I led memorial prayers virtually from a computer in the consultation room of the Spiritual Care Department, where I work as a multi-faith chaplain at the National Institutes of Health Clinical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Simultaneously, in the adjacent chapel, my chaplain colleague, Father Dominic Ashkar, a Catholic priest, graciously agreed to my request to hold a memorial mass with the intention of Mr. Michal Cegelski, who saved Rose and my family matriarchs, and who was a righteous martyr for our family and for me. Prayers for the Catholic rite were ascending for Mr. Cegelski, just as Rose received a traditional Jewish funeral. Indeed, few days pass in my work as a chaplain when I do not think of Mr. Michal Cegelski and the other non-Jews who helped save my family. It is no coincidence that I find myself working in a multi-faith capacity in my hospital and in my outreach to individuals facing imminent death on death rows throughout this country. Clara said, "We are the survivors." Rose added, "We lost the biggest part of our life." Clara said that we happen to be very lucky to be here. This must be a miracle that we survived all that, surviving the war and all the troubles that we had. It's a miracle that we are living. Rose agreed, saying that she and her sister live our lives like a dream at this point. We can't believe that we are here, that we are alive, and that we experience a life like the people in this country. The Spektor sisters' story is tantamount to a miracle, though their agents of deliverance were regular people of this world. They were righteous Gentiles from whose ranks thousands of others like the Spektors were kept alive. My grandmother and her family, salvation came in the form of Mr. Cegelski, who made the ultimate sacrifice in order to save Ita, Clara, Rose, and Libby. We, the descendants of Fega, Ita, Clara, and Rose, owe our lives to the righteous Gentiles. I'd like to present this quote here from a book by Mordechai Paldiel. In every country that felt the frightening stomp of the Nazi boot, the righteous were to be found. This is a comforting sign that the search for the ultimate better society of human beings, which is the goal of all the world's major religions, is not an empty quest. The deeds of the righteous are a reminder that this quest is still filled with much energy, drive, and hope. And this is the conclusion of the paper that I wrote. The survival story of the Spektor family reminds us never to forget the righteous Gentiles, calls upon us to honor their memories in perpetuity. Like stars in the night sky, these righteous Gentiles forever serve as reminders that even in one of humanity's darkest hours, beacons of hope still shine brightly. As our generation strives to move out from under the Holocaust's immense shadow, may we draw strength and inspiration from the memories of these heroes. In the book of Isaiah, the prophet implores the Jews to become a model for the world by becoming an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. I say, may the memories of the righteous Gentiles serve as our eternal source of light. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. And I'd just like to conclude with a couple pictures. This is Rose's great-granddaughter, Winnie, picture taken in 2021. And this is Clara's great-granddaughters, Sunny and Libby, taken right in this room here where I'm speaking a few weeks ago. Loving sisters, just as Rose and Clara for decades were loving sisters.
Thank you so much for sharing this story. What a powerful story that it truly is. I am going to go ahead and invite a few people to be co-hosts so that they can start sharing their screen. And then as they come on, Michael will tell about these lovely people.
And my apologies for going over time. I should have had a watch with me here.
You are fine. Totally fine. So for those of you that just came on, please go ahead and open your video and unmute.
So Naomi, if you're there, if you're able to connect, that'd be great as well. So while we're waiting, it is a great honor for me, myself, to see for the first time the in person. I believe that Michal Cegelski, and Michal, I believe you are the great grandson of Michal Cegelski, who saved my family. Is that
Yes,
correct?
hello, exactly. Yes, hello, hello. Yes, I am.
It is on behalf of all my family, and we're hopefully going to be able to get my grandmother on here. Um, uh, it's an honor to see you and to meet the namesake. Here she comes, the namesake of the man who, without whom I wouldn't be standing here today. And I see Naomi is coming on. Naomi is my my maternal aunt. Okay, and that we just had a glimpse. If you turn the video on, um, Oh, okay. We had a. Oh, there she is. Hi, Grandma.
Hi.
Okay. This is Clara Grossman.
Nice to meet you.
So,
Nice to meet you.
okay.
Say it again, Mom.
Yes. So Grandma, this Naomi, you can point to the part of the screen where you see Michal is on the left, or our left. So that is the great grandson of Mr. Cegelski.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Porządny człowiek.
They heard you.
Well, now you're talking in code. I don't know what that means.
You have
Not
to
fair.
say what that means.
There is a wonderful man.
Good man.
Good man.
Mr. Tversky is a wonderful man, wonderful human being. Yeah, to help. No. It's a shame that he had to get died this way. We didn't expect it. Yeah. I always remember. Ja pamiętam Mr. Tversky.
No my nie mieliśmy takiej szansy. We don't remember. We only remember my grandfather Janek and my grandfather Olympia. You remember them also, yes? Olympia and Janek.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening.
He remembers Yannick. They remember Yannick, but they don't know any of the others.
No?
And
Sons, I think the oldest son.
Mhm.
and forgive me, Tomek, is that you?
Yes,
Yes.
that's me.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. So I apologize. I didn't introduce Tomek. Tomek is the great grandson of Michal Cegelski.
Tomek.
Correct?
Can-
Yes. Tomek on the right.
The
You
older
speak
one.
English?
Okay. With us, there is also my brother Artur, the oldest son of
Oh.
Tadeusz, the oldest son of Janek, the oldest son of Michał. So we are here not only from Poland, but also from Canada, the Cegielski family.
Oh. Somebody
Oh,
from Canada.
it's an honor to meet you, Arthur.
Hello, I don't know whether you can hear me.
Here.
Yes.
Yeah, so my name is Artur and I'm Tomek's brother, the oldest son of Tadeusz, and my great grandfather was Michał Cegielski, and I have heard a lot of stories about him. You know, I never heard too many stories about helping Jew people. I think that it was kind of even not well taken by later on by Polish government. There is a lot of anti-Semitism in Polish, culture, but which I don't understand. Right now, I'm living in Canada, where fortunately everybody lives so far peacefully, and for me, any person is just exactly a person. So I'm glad that I'm here, but I'm also very, very nice and surprised that my brother, could find you, and this is a, very important part of my heritage and my family history, and I'm just really moved and almost speechless. It was very nice presentation. I wish I could have this, in form of maybe video. I could show and present it to my family, to my, my wife, which is not with me. I'm just right now with my grandson, which it's a kind of a responsibility to take care of him every Sunday. So I wasn't prepared to be at home. I learned about this, video meeting yesterday evening, and I'm lucky that I'm just actually can see you guys and could listen to all this very, very, moving stories.
great grandson.
Great, great.
Thank you so much for being here, and I'm just reflecting on how your grandchildren, that would be the great grandchildren of Michal Cegielski. And I believe, thanks to Leah and Candles, this is being recorded. So
Great.
I believe you'll be able to get a recording of this, and I can also send you the paper that we have. And I would be remiss also not to mention again Camille Copera, who is, I believe, is on here now, listening, the research and documentation specialist at the Ulma Family Museum of Poles Saving Jews in World War II in Markowa, Poland. And he was really the one who was able to, because for decades, oh, here he comes. Okay. For decades, we just knew, it was a Mr. Cegielski, and we wanted to honor him, but we didn't have even his first name. And so we couldn't, we were searching and searching and searching. And finally, I'll let Camille take over if you're able to come in, Camille.
Yes, hello. I hope that everyone can hear me right now. So it was, it was very powerful story, and this meeting between your family, between the survivors' family and rescuers' family, and about that it was challenge to find the Cegielski family, because there were many, I don't know how to say, misleading information sometimes in your paper, which was great, because villages like Żabokrzyki or Berezyna are gone right now, and it was challenging to find information about where the story begins, and what really happened, and what was the real name of the people who gave his life to rescue Spektor family. And fortunately, Cegielskis gave information to the database of the Wołyń victims in Poland, and then I contacted with this database, and people from this database give me information and contact to the Tomasz Cegielski. So this is the story behind my research and connection and sharing this information with you.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Camille, on behalf of our family as well. Naomi, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say as well, putting you on the spot there, but you've been at this so much longer than I have been, and with research and everything, feel
Yes,
free.
I just wanted to thank everyone for their help. This has been a wonderful experience for my mother, for myself, I have cousins, Rose's daughters. They're all interested in all of this. So it's me talking with the mask on, sitting next to my mother. So we've been in touch, we've been corresponding and sharing information. It's such a pleasure to meet such wonderful people, genuine, wonderful people with big hearts. I mean, it's like my nephew Michael said, none of us would be here if it weren't for your family. And so we are so very grateful, and we're so grateful that you gave us the information and provided what we could. We are still waiting for Yad Vashem to respond. They told us it would take a while, but the name belongs in a memorial, your family's name. It's an incredible family, and we thank you for everything that you've done. And we wish you to stay well during these times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I interrupt and ask, where does it stand with Yad Vashem? Like, how far are you in the process, and what are you still hoping to find and get and need?
We completed the entire story. The entire package was sent to them, including recordings. approximately 6 months ago, if I'm not mistaken. And I was warned that it could take up to a year to hear anything back. So unfortunately, it's out of my hands, but they do indeed have everything.
Okay. Well, I hope that you let us know when it does happen. I think our Candles viewers are, we're now a part of this story, and we just want to see it to the end. So please let us know.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your help and for broadcasting this.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. Like somebody put it in the chat section, that to actually see the people, even if it's generations later, but to see the people that were involved, and you know, it's so true. Without the help, then you know, your stories wouldn't be here today.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
Candles is recording this, and it will be available for view on our website for the next 30 days. But I can also send the recording to Michael, and then he can share it with anybody that he so chooses.
Thank you.
So how to contact Michael? I can contact him through my brother Tomek?
Yes, I will give you contact on Facebook to Michael, as we have talking via Messenger. So I will give you it.
Okay, great.
And I just want to ask very quickly, Artur, where in Canada are you?
Edmonton, Alberta. Beautiful,
Okay.
snowy. You know, we have right now snow outside. I stopped on my road from you know, play place with my you know, grandson Mateo, but you know, it's warm here, so we could sit and hear without any problem. I would really be happy to you know, to listen this again, and to just pay a little bit more attention to pictures you showed. Like, so there is a video and also paper about you know, family history, or where I can get the pictures.
I will happy to send you everything I have.
Okay.
And you know, absolutely. I lived in Vancouver, British Columbia for 3 years.
Oh.
That's where I met my wife. I was a Jewish prison chaplain out there, and so I have family in Montreal. So we're big friends of Canada. So hello back there. Anyhow, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks a lot for organizing this event. It was really powerful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that our audience was so moved and so just appreciative. There really are no questions. We just want to be a part of the story and hear the ending. I will type into the chat box to everybody the actual web address to Candles Holocaust Museum. It will not give me a few days to get it up, but it will be up by the end of the week. So this is our website, so you're able to go to this website to see this. It looks like somebody else has raised their hand. If you could please use the Q&A box and type your question in there, I would appreciate that. So across the bottom, there should be something that says Q&A. So if you type that in, I can share your questions.
While we're waiting for that question to come up, just so that folks know, correct me if I'm wrong, Naomi, but I think the process of getting the righteous Gentile confirmation, it actually is adjudicated by an Israeli Supreme Court justice. Each case is adjudicated at that high level, so that's why the process takes so long.
Okay. That is my understanding, that there is a process. There's a whole list of criteria, so that the Yad Vashem does go through each criteria just to make sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you want me to look for a question, Leah?
Like the others and
Yeah.
I just typically would like for you to type into the chat box. This is a unique situation in which we give other people the chance to be seen and to be heard instead of our panelists. So it's just a safety precaution. So Sally and Bob, if you'd like to type either into the chat box or to the Q&A button what your comments are. Otherwise, I don't see any other questions.
Any other questions?
There's been several comments in the chat box, just extraordinary stories and so touching to meet all of you relatives. We do have one that says, do you think you will plan a reunion in which you get to actually meet face to face, or will you maybe continue to Zoom?
Well, part of that will depend on the pandemic. Here I am in College Park, Maryland. Naomi and my grandmother are in West Palm Beach, Florida. We have Canada and Poland. So hopefully we can manage it. Maybe you know, sooner than later. I'm sure Grandma would appreciate that, but we'll certainly would love to, ideally. That just speaking for me.
Right.
We're reunited through our hearts. So
Definitely.
we couldn't get any closer than that.
Yes. Yes, very much reunited through your hearts. There were definitely tears of happiness when you all got to see each other.
Yeah.
I see some questions in the chat. The speaker, I am in College Park, Maryland, and my grandmother, Clara Grossman, is with Naomi Hoban in West Palm Beach, Florida. That's our side of the story. Actually, Tomek and Michal, where in Poland are you?
Well, we are in Rumia, which is 50,000 city of inhabitants, but it's in the north of Poland. It's close to, I don't know if you heard of Gdańsk, maybe. Yeah,
Gdansk.
Yeah, close to Gdańsk. Yeah, close to the
Gdańsk.
city.
Yeah, Polish.
Yeah.
Polish.
Yes. As
And what's the name of the city again?
Rumia, but my dad is originally from Puławy, which is quite close to Wołyń, where my great grandpa lived and saved.
Janek and Olympia, after war, they moved to very close to Wołyń, just by the new border to Chełm county. So Chełm. They hope for long years that they will be able to go back, but it was not possible to go back to Wołyń. Janek went to the place where the house was, the home was, in 1990, when the 1992, when the was no Soviet Union, only Ukraine. So they, with my father, go to see this place, and there was nothing, just some trees, no sign of home, just the field,
an empty field.
Empty field in this place. Yeah. I've got the picture of this land with my father on this with the ground, but there is no sign of home at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I do have a question that came through, and it's for the Shogelskis. When did you learn about your grandfather and how he had helped save these sisters?
It was thanks to Mr. Kamil Kopera, who has found that that Cegielski, which Michael was looking for, is the same Cegielski I was reported to the database of Wołyń victims, and we didn't know sooner about this. We just knew from
We
Michael.
yes.
So it wasn't a family story, as in Michael's family, and they shared their story through the generations. It was
No.
not something that was passed down.
No, it was kind of secret, I think.
Mm.
It was not known. No, we didn't know earlier.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So we are just glad that we got to know this
Yeah.
amazing fact, and
Yeah.
it was a shock for us, as my dad's wife, granddad also saved Jew during the Second World War, quite
Oh,
close. And then when we got to know this one, we were just amazed, and we are glad that my great granddad and my dad great and my dad great granddad could help you.
you are good stock. So, you know, you
yeah.
have a great family history, and, you know, you are going to do wonderful things in this world.
Yes.
Amen. I send every blessing to all of you that I can, and you know, that you carry his name is such an amazing amazing thing, and
Yeah,
now you know more
proud
of his
of that.
story.
Yeah. Wow.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I heard the stories from my granddad about his granddad Michał. That, well, I only knew that he lived in Wołyń and that he was killed tragically by the Ukrainians, but nothing else. I knew that my great granddad was named Michał, so that was quite funny to me as I was a young person, but now it's an honor to be named as him for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very much.
We tip our hat to you.
She's a woman.
No.
Grandma, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I want to thank you, the people, for being so wonderful. And I'm sorry about Mr. Cegielski. We didn't have a chance to see him after the war, because everybody was spread out through the world, and we didn't know where the people were. I'm still looking for my younger sister, Libby, and I think she's alive, but I'm not too sure. We don't know what happened to her. So this is what happened after the war. Everybody was separated and disappeared. We know nothing about it. Yeah.
Well, as lovely as this reunion is, if there is nothing else that you want to share or say, I just want to thank everybody again for being here. It was really great. It was just a really powerful and moving story, and this added layer of getting to meet the family of the rescuer, just, I think we'll remember this for a long time.
Absolutely.
Yes. So Candles offers education like this once a month. Next month on December 5th, we will have a documentary titled Nobody Wants Us. It tells the story of 3 teenagers and their families hoping to make it safely onto American soil after escaping the Nazi invasion of Europe. Laura Seltzer-Dooney is the documentarian, and she will be with us after the film in order to discuss it and answer questions. So everybody stay safe and stay warm, and thank you again for spending some time with us on this Sunday afternoon.
Thank you for everything. We appreciate it so very much.
It was wonderful, and I'm so glad that Michael and I were able to become connected through Terry, and we at the museum miss Terry every day. So
If I may, it would take literally 1 minute. I'd just like to offer a quick blessing for the family. Is it okay for me to do that? This is the priestly benediction, the old blessing in the Jewish tradition, and we offer it to all your family. It means, may the Lord bless you and keep you, turn his face upon you and grant you grace, and turn his face upon you and grant you peace. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'asem lecha. Shalom, 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 shalom.
Amen.
Shalom. Thank you, Leah.
thank you.
Okay. Goodbye, Cegelski family. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
Ansa.
Camille, thank
Bye.
you.
Everything the best for you. Best wishes.
And you too. And you too.
It was nice to see you, Clara.
Good to see you too. It's wonderful.
Bye. Have a nice day. For us, it's
You too.
almost 11
I was gonna
p.m.
say,
So it's quite late, but
Oh,
we are able to leave.
good
in a few
night.
days.
good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Next time.
Next time.